In Lesson 2, I'll talk about using PowerShell with Visual Studio Code. You do have some options in terms of what editor you decide to use for writing your PowerShell scripts. The first is Notepad or any other basic text editor. You can use this to write your scripts, however, I don't recommend it because there's no IntelliSense, there's no debugging capabilities. It's also difficult to read. So you do have that black text with a white background. The next editor that's popular is PowerShell ISE. It does come with Windows 10, and it's a decent editor for writing your PowerShell scripts, especially if you don't have the ability to use Visual Studio Code. Finally, there's Visual Studio Code. This is also referred to as VS Code. It's free. This is what the cool kids are using now. Plus, there's plenty of good examples out there to show you how to use PowerShell ISE. So I kind of want to focus on the future. So why use VS Code? There's plenty of reasons. Number one, it supports just about every programming language out there. So if you're just feeling comfortable writing PowerShell, that's fine. If you decide at a later point to pick up another language, you don't have to go to a completely different tool. You can just stay in VS Code, and a lot of the options will be familiar to you at that point. It's available cross-platform, so VS Code, you can use it on Windows, Mac, Linux. Plus, finally it's a light IDE functionality, so it is lightweight. It's not a full-fledged IDE like Visual Studio, but it does have the common IDE capabilities that one would expect and for writing code. So debugging, version control, integrated terminal, extensions. So in our case, we're focused on PowerShell. So with VS Code, you actually need to install the PowerShell extension, which is going to make your life writing PowerShell much easier with VS Code. Syntax highlighting, code snippets. Yes, there's built-in IntelliSense for your commandlets. There's a built-in rule-based analysis, which uses the PSS script analyzer settings. And there's some rules that are built in, and it'll look at your PowerShell code on the fly. I'll show you a demo of that in a little bit. There's a reference. You can find references of commandlets and variables in your code, as well as run and debug your PowerShell code. So let's dive into the PowerShell extension setup and feature demo. Okay, I'm in VS Code, and the very first thing I'm going to do is open up a script that I wrote a couple years ago for collecting ULS logs. And because it's a PS1 file, the very first thing that pops up is a notification that there's a PowerShell extension that I can install. This is one way to install the extension. Another way is to use the command palette. So I'm going to go with that approach. I'm going to close this. And to get to the command palette, you just hit Control P, and you can type in ext install PowerShell. That opens up the extensions window pane on the left, and this is actually the extensions marketplace. And PowerShell's at the very top. I'm going to select that, and in doing so, there's a lot of supported documentation that go over features, methods to install the extension, if you need to report a problem. In this case, I'm just going to install. Notice as soon as I install it, for those of you who are very comfortable with the look and feel of PowerShell ISE, I get a prompt for a PowerShell ISE theme. I'll go ahead and select this theme. And it is easy to change your color theme later if you'd like. A nice validation technique to see what extensions you have installed is to come back to the command palette underneath the extensions window and type in @ installed. And you can see I've got, let's see, 4 extensions installed. Notice at the bottom right, the terminal window, after installing the extension, automatically have a new terminal that was added, which is the PowerShell integrated console. So this is a really nice feature of VS Code, is the ability to have multiple terminals. We'll talk more about some of these terminals later. Let's continue. I'm going to go ahead and click the Explorer icon and also close the PowerShell extension tab to get back to my script. And the very first thing I want to show you is the formatting options. So in this case, everything in this script is pushed over to the left. In order to improve the readability of this script, I'm going to right click and select Format Document. So if you've gone through hundreds of lines of PowerShell before and went through the painstaking process of tabbing over your line to improve the readability, this format option is a wonderful thing. Let's move on to the references. So if I go to line 16 in my code, or I'm sorry, yeah, line 16, you can see I've got 3 references. If I were to click the references, what's great about this is it's going to show me everywhere this cust log path function was called. So in here, if I click on it, you can see this window pane open up, and it opens up to the first reference on line 146. On the right, I can easily click to the next reference, which is line 157, and finally line 168. So it is handy if you're writing complex scripts and you run into a hiccup with one of the lines that's calling that function. This is a great way to kind of accelerate the resolution by quickly finding the line of code in this manner. I'm going to go ahead and close the reference window now. Next, I want to talk about the script analyzer. Again, this runs in the background and it's looking for any issues with my PowerShell. In this case, I do have a few warnings, so there were some rules that were triggered. In order to look at those, I can click on Problems, and you can see my warnings. So good news, I don't have any errors, but I still need to kind of look at these warnings and address them. What's nice about this is I can click each line and get to that particular section in code. And notice I have 5 of the same type of warning, which is I'm using an alias of question mark instead of where dash object. So in order to comply with this rule, what I can do is I could manually go to each line and make the change. I don't want to do that. Maybe I'm a little lazy. But this brings up my favorite feature of VS Code, and that's the ability to change one line and have it impact that change everywhere. So in this case, it's a question mark. So in order to change that, I'm just going to basically highlight the question mark and then hit Control F2. And you can see I have the question mark on line 11 as well as line 19. So what I want to do is, instead of using the alias, I'm going to use where dash object. And you can see it changed on both line 11 and 19, and everywhere else that question mark alias was used. What's nice about this is notice how quickly the script analyzer ran in the background. So now I just have my one warning left, which I'm not too worried about that. But this is a nice feature. That completes the demo. So let's jump into the next slide, which is debugging PowerShell in VS Code.
The intent with the next demo is to show you some basics around debugging your PowerShell scripts in VS Code. Things like setting up breakpoints, using the integrated terminal, and walking your code, stepping over, step into, and step out.
Let's go ahead and just jump into a demo now. Okay, we're in the last demo for this particular lesson, and we're going to explore some of the debug capabilities with VS Code. I'm using a different script, and this script is a result of the first lesson of the third module where I walked you through manually running those commandlets in order to build a content type, add some site columns, and then create a list and add the content type to that particular list. This script actually automates that functionality, and I added each commandlet into a custom function in order to kind of show off some of the windows, especially the call stack window within the debug scenario. So we'll go into that. Another really good thing I like about VS Code is just looking at the script panel. It's easy to see all the functions I have in my script because I can go to the breadcrumb, I can click on this setup list function, and you can kind of see how I have this set up. So I start with creating site columns. When I reach the end of that function, I'm calling create content type. At the end of that function, I'm calling add columns to content type. And then I end up with calling the setup list, which actually creates the list and it adds the views. So let's focus on the debug. The very first thing I need to do is click on the debug icon on the left, or you could hit Control-Shift-D. And notice you've got a few different options in there. You've got variables, you have a watch window, a call stack, and you also have a view of your breakpoints, which I don't have any set yet. So let's start there. The very first and most common type of breakpoint is a line breakpoint. So I'm going to set a breakpoint on line 5. So on the left of line 5, I'm just going to click. There we go. So you can see the line breakpoint is just a red circle, and now the breakpoints section at the very bottom here has the breakpoint listed. Another breakpoint that I could use is called a function breakpoint. So when a function is called, I want to break into that. I want the debugger to break in, and so I can inspect that function and some of the variables in that function. In order to do that, pretty easy to do. I can just click the plus symbol next to my breakpoints section, and then I can just type in the function name. So in this case, I'm probably going to want to use this add columns to content type. So I'll just type that in. Columns to content type. Let's make sure that's correct. Add columns to content type. Perfect. And then there you go. I hit enter, and you can see I've got a red triangle that indicates a function breakpoint. Finally, you have the ability to break on a condition. There's a couple other breakpoints, but I'm just going to focus on these 3. To break on a condition, that's really useful whenever you are looping through set of like objects. For instance, in this case, I want to loop through all the columns, and then I'm going to add a column to the content type, and that's what this is doing. So in this case, I only want to break in when the column title is equal to miles. So what I can do here is first set the line breakpoint, and then I can right click on it, click edit breakpoint, and then you can see I have an expression that popped up. So in this case, my expression, I want to specify when the column title equals miles. Hit enter. And notice the icon on that breakpoint changes a little bit. So if I hover over it, well, it's a red circle with 2 white lines, but if I hover over it, you can see the expression is listed. So that is breaking on a condition. When I run this debug scenario, I expect it to break 3 different times, and we'll go through that. Next, I'm interested in kind of looking at variables as I go through this debug session. So I'm going to add a couple variables to my watch window. The first one is a list. And then I also want to look at, as I'm going through the for each, I want to see what the column title is so I can add that to my watch window. Cool. Type it in, hit enter, good to go. All right, let's start the debug session. In order to do that, I can go up to the top, I can click start debug. I could also just hit F5, or I could just hit the play button on the left here. So I'll just go to debug and start debugging. All right, looks like I hit my first breakpoint. You get a yellow line, and you get this kind of yellow sideways triangle. That's how what line it broke on. Notice it's right after this particular function call, and that is the function breakpoint I set up down here. Another way to validate is to look at the call stack, and you'll see paused on the function breakpoint. So really easy. Let's see. So another thing within the call stack, notice I can click anywhere in here and take a look and inspect. So that's kind of useful. So each frame, you can kind of jump to it and take a look. All right, so let's continue. So to jump to the next breakpoint, I'm just going to hit F5, or I can hit the play button up here to continue. So now I've hit a different breakpoint. In this case, this is my conditional breakpoint. So you can see I'm in my for each, and notice the variable for my watch window has populated with miles. So the conditional breakpoint did work. This illustrates a lot of value, especially if you're looping a large number of different elements, like let's say in an array, and you only want it to break when an element is a certain value. That's extremely useful. In this case, I'm just going to kind of step into this so you can see the value change from the watch window. So I'm just going to come up here and hit the down arrow. So it's still miles. And notice it changed to sold. I'll now hit the F5 button or the play to continue. And now we've hit my line breakpoint. So now you can see I've got, I'm into the very last function. And I can tell because the call stack, right? So we kind of start from the bottom, work our way up. Now I'm in the setup list function. Notice on the upper left I have variables window, and this is a good view of different variables that, depending on where you're at in the script, will be exposed. So in this case, I broke in on line 5, so I have these are different groups of variables, and they all mean something a little different. For this particular demo, I'm focused on the auto group, which usually only exposes variables that are defined in my code. So in this case, at the point in time, I'm working with the temp CT variable. So you can see it here, and I can actually use this and kind of gain more information if I want in terms of looking at the properties and seeing what their values are. So that's pretty handy. The last thing is the terminal section, or the terminal window down below. So now that I'm broken in, I can actually do some cool things with this particular debug session. So for example, I can actually inspect tempct here. I could make changes to it if I want. I could test these lines, right? So I could actually do this kind of if checking down here manually if I want. So it's valuable, especially if you're getting an unexpected result in PowerShell, and you need to kind of dig in and understand why it's breaking, or try maybe different syntax against that particular line you're focused on. This is exactly what this PowerShell integrated console is used for. So it's a really nice feature. Finally, to stop your debug session, just hit the stop, or you can hit Shift F5. And this completes lesson 2.